Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. We're in Washington in the Capitol building with Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Now, you've been very outspoken recently on the question of U.S. policy in Libya, and you've been very critical about it. So start with your fundamental critique, and then we'll get into what's happening now.
The Constitution of the United States makes it abundantly clear that the President does not have the war power. Article 1, Section 8, the founders vested that power with the House of Representatives. The President took this country into a war without checking with Congress, and there is nothing in the Constitution that supports the reason why he did it. There is nothing in the Constitution that absolves him of his responsibility to be able to come to the Congress.
Now, how does the White House respond to this? They said they did consult the Senate. There seems to be sort of, it's hard to get a pin how they're responding.
There was no vote in the Senate, and there was no vote in the House.
Now, the Constitution calls for a vote, not just talking to people.
Well, the idea of the Congress is that people vote. You don't just check with a few members and say, well, we check with Congress. You don't check with one member and say it's okay. The Constitution says that the Congress has the power to declare war. Now, the White House Office of Legal Counsel produced a very tortured memorandum which tried to make a case for war, including asserting that the President has the ability to conduct war because of the Article 2 provision relating to his ability to make treaties with foreign nations. I mean, it's ridiculous. There is no right under Article 2 that gives the President the ability to be able to conduct war.
Now, given the kind of strange fractured lines in Congress, some of the libertarians in the Republican Party agree with you on this. Is this going to go further, the issue of the what you believe is the unconstitutionality of this?
I think there's a couple...
You've actually called for that this could be impeachable. You used the word.
Well, you know, it's a violation of the Constitution. Any violation of the Constitution goes into that area where a president could be putting his office in jeopardy. I mean, somebody needed to say that. Now, will there be a process of impeachment? No. But the process of impeachment is one thing. The fact that a president violates the Constitution and commits an offense that could subject him to impeachment is another thing. Now, he has no right to put the presidency in jeopardy by taking that action. He could have simply come to Congress. He had the time to do it. He had time to check with the Arab League, to check with NATO and the Security Council, to be able to talk to so many different elements involved in the coalition, including the governments of France and the UK, and he didn't have time to check with the United States Congress. Are you kidding?
Let's go to the substance of the issue. One of the issues you raised in your speech on Libya in the House was that there was this military exercise plan, something called Southern Storm, I believe, and there hasn't been much media attention to this. You raised some questions that you thought should be answered. First of all, tell us what this story is, and have you got any answers?
On November the 10th, 2010, the governments of France and the UK came together in a mutual defense agreement. As part of that agreement, they determined that they would conduct joint war games. And the joint war games would be against a mythical dictator in a mythical country south of their nations, subject to a pretend UN Security Council resolution, and it would involve airstrikes against this mythical nation.
And ground troops.
Well,
in the exercises.
The exercise was called Southern Storm or Southern Mistral. Now, what was interesting is, according to the war games, the plan of attack was to be initiated March 21st through March 25th. Now, I noted this because there's an amazing similarity in the planning for these war games and the actual execution of a war against Libya led by France and Great Britain. So we need to find out.
At almost the precise time there actually was such a war.
Right.
Is the point.
We need to find out. What was this about? Was there a preconceived plan of attack against Libya, which then used the allegations of a forthcoming massacre as a pretext to launch that attack?
Now, is there any evidence now, other than a kind of a conclusion one draws, but is there actually any evidence now that it connects the two things? I mean, it's not out of the question that it's coincidental.
Well, here, you have a set of facts that relate to the creation of war games, which correspond almost identically to what actually happened. So we know that. Now, the question is, how far in advance was an attack on Libya conceived?
And have you been able to ask these questions as a congressman? Are you getting any answers?
No,
from the Pentagon or from State Department?
Events are moving so quickly that it will be a while before we get answers to these things.
Okay, let's talk.
But we need to put this out in a public record. I mean, it's a matter of fact that there were war games planned by France and Great Britain, and that they
almost in the precise dates.
They're just nearly identical to the execution of the war against Libya.
You issued a statement in the last few days talking about the African Union peace proposal. It's not getting, it certainly did not get a warm reception in Benghazi, and it doesn't seem to be getting much support from the US or NATO. Talk a bit about what your view is on that.
Well, we have to ask, what do the rebels want? They want regime change. What does the US want? It wants regime change. What do France and the UK want? They want regime change. Guess what? The UN mandate doesn't provide for that. France and the UK are trying to prevail upon NATO to prosecute an attack against Gaddafi's forces towards the goal of regime change. There's just no question about it. It's incontrovertible evidence. So we have to ask this. If the goal is to protect civilians from harm, nations are now pursuing a strategy beyond the UN mandate that is absolutely guaranteed to foment an expanding civil war that will put millions of people at risk in Libya.
Now, do you accept the premise that Gaddafi is a dictator and Libyan people do have a right to overthrow him if that's what they want?
Well, we don't know the extent to which the rebels have broad support in the country of Libya. We know they do in Benghazi, but we don't know the kind of support they have across the country.
But in the first few days of the uprisings, outside of Tripoli, something like 80% of the cities seemed to be controlled by rebels until his pushback.
But we don't know the extent to which the rebels have broad support. Think about this. If they had broad support in the way that those who wanted change, nonviolent change, in Egypt and Tunisia had, it just happens. There are irrevocable forces that are set in motion when the entire population of a country rises up and says, we are not going to take this anymore. But that's not what happened in Libya. The Western media would want you to believe that, that everyone in Libya wants Gaddafi out and that Gaddafi's holding on only by military power. That's absolutely not clear, because we don't see the kind of broad-based support that the rebels, if in fact they do represent the legitimate aspirations of all the people of Libya, would have. In the end, this is an internal matter that relates to the people of Libya having to make their own decisions about the outcome. It is not for Western intervention to determine who should be the leader of Libya. Look, I have no brief for Gaddafi, but the fact of the matter is that regime change is beyond the UN mandate, and regime change will trigger a broad civil war, and that we have no right to inflict that on Libya. There is no reason rhyme for that.
And the point you make in your statement is that rebels would not be in a position to reject an African Union peace offer if they didn't have this kind of backing.
Well, who died and left them in charge of Libya? And who is going to now accede to the rebels' demands? Look, who are the rebels? In Washington in the last few weeks, You can't even get a straight answer out of the administration about who the rebels are. We learn that there are links to Al-Qaeda. We learn that there are links to the CIA. This looks like a, if it wasn't so serious, it would almost be comic.
But there's another side to it. We had a journalist team in Benghazi, and their sense of it was that this was a very much, at least in the area they were in, Benghazi, a really expression of democratic will. I mean, I'm seeing something in Washington where they don't, like, there's a whole section of Washington foreign policy thinkers here who don't want, are not so sure about regime change anymore because they don't trust this popular uprising, where they were making deals with Gaddafi, and we know Gaddafi was playing ball pretty well up until now.
This is a question about whether events in Benghazi, where an insurrection developed, are to be used to try to overthrow Gaddafi. And you know what? We cannot determine that outcome.
And that's the point. The resolution didn't authorize any of this.
You know, it was to protect civilian populations, and if we move towards regime change, we jeopardize civilians on both sides of this. And it's very clear that Gaddafi has his supporters. So why are we intervening in this? What is this about?
So would you suggest the U.S. then should give some credence or support to the African Union proposal?
Absolutely. You want a peace? Then take an opportunity for peace. Now, whether Gaddafi stays or goes, we shouldn't have an interest in that. Are we going to keep going around the world telling people who their leaders ought to be? For whose interest? What is this really about? And it's more than interesting that we're promoting a geographical approach in Libya where the lines seem to be trying to split Libya to protect the oil resources on behalf of the rebels, whoever they are. I mean, think about it. In the first week, Qatar makes a deal with the rebels for the marketing of oil. And then Qatar uses its single jet to be part of the no-fly zone. What a joke. Except that when it comes to the actual money that's involved about oil, the rebels are right there to try to cash in. They're now trying to get access to the $40 billion in seized assets, which the United States has executed on the Gaddafi regime. And what would they do with that? Buy arms. So, you know, this is a point.
But if you're fighting a dictatorship, what else would you do? There's two different questions here.
Well, you know what, though? Good.
It's not a U.S. It's not an American issue.
They want to fight a dictatorship. Go for it, okay? But you know what? Not in our intervention, not in our dime, not with our efforts to try to promote whatever policies the U.S. is about. Look, we intervened in Iraq. And that was about regime change. It was also trying to get control of Iraq's oil. We've intervened mightily and continue to be present in Afghanistan. We're doing these flyovers, which are another form of military intervention with these drones in Pakistan. So this is the fourth war. What are we about anymore? I mean,
what do you make of a situation where in the House, and in terms of the American representative government now, you have more in common on foreign policy with somebody like Ron Paul than you do with the president?
Well, Ron Paul has been very honest about his position about things. He and I agree that we need to put a stop to this interventionism, that interventionism is leading America on the path to destruction, that interventionism belies that we have a domestic agenda. We can't take care of things here at home, but we're going to tell people in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Pakistan how to live? Are you kidding me? Look, it's time that we started to focus what we are about as a country. And if all we are about is a military machine looking for dragons to slay around the world, then we're headed to our own demise. The Soviet Union couldn't tolerate this kind of an approach. They fell of the weight of the tremendous effort to build an empire, and we are headed for the same thing if we don't change direction. So Ron Paul and I, on these issues, there's no space between us.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.